I found the boy 3 days after the sky burned. The forest on Furtick never recovered from the company's saws, and what was left of it after the Lugo's drones came through was something between a cemetery and a kitchen. Black stumps, the smell of pine sap cooked under plasma, a wind that carried ash up out of the valley and dropped it on my shoulders like the moon was trying to apologize. I had been a salvage hand for 19 years by then, 12 of them on that moon, and I knew every game trail and every fire road and every dry creek the loggers had left behind. So when the second shockwave rolled across the ridge and the orbital fight up above turned the night green and red and then a hard, ugly white, I did what any man with a useful skull would have done. I shut the lights in my cabin, killed the heater, and got under the floor. I stayed under the floor for 2 days. I had water and crackers and a flask of something I had been saving for a wedding that never happened, and I sipped at it slow, listening to the drones move overhead. They sound like nothing, that's the worst of them. A Findelian patrol skimmer has a low engine note you can feel in your back teeth. A logging hauler shakes the whole hollow. A Lugo's triangle makes the air get heavier, and that is all. No engine, no wash. You only know they are above you because the dust on the rafters stops moving. On the third morning, the dust moved again, and I came up out of the floor and went looking for the wreck I had seen burn in. I had watched it come down on the first night, when I was still on the porch with the flask in my hand and no sense in my head. A small ship, not a fighter, not a freighter either, something private. It had come in low over the ridge with one engine dead and the other coughing, and it had clipped the top of the burn and gone into the bowl where the loggers used to stage their loads. I had marked the spot in my head the way you mark a deer that you have shot but not yet found. Bowl 2 ridges south, near the old splitter pad. I took the rifle and a coil of rope, and the medical kit my brother had sent me the year he died, and I walked. The ship was smaller than I had thought, about the size of a panel van. The hull had that mother-of-pearl finish you used to see on Findelian royal couriers before the war, the kind of metal that catches the light and throws it back in colors that aren't supposed to be in the sky. Most of that finish was scorched off now. The nose was buried 2 meters into the ash. The rear ramp had come down on the landing, or maybe somebody had blown it down on purpose, and there were tracks coming out. Small tracks. A child's boot, dragging on one side. I followed them up to the splitter pad and into the brush, and I found him under a deadfall, asleep with his face in the dirt, and his hand curled around something that pulsed soft blue between his fingers. He could not have been more than 10. I want to say I knew right away what he was. I didn't. I thought he was a colonist kid whose family had been on that ship, and I went down on one knee in the ash and said, "Son, I'm a friend," and I touched his shoulder. He came up off the ground like a snake. The thing in his hand opened, and a blade of cold blue light unfolded out of it, and he held it the length of my throat and looked at me with eyes that were not afraid the way a child's eyes are afraid. They were afraid the way a soldier's eyes are afraid. Calm and watching, and counting the seconds until he had to decide. "Speak your house," he said. I didn't have a house. I'm a salvage hand on a logged-out moon. I told him so. He looked at me for a long time. Then he let the blade fold itself back into his palm, and he sat down in the ash and started to cry, and I understood for the first time that there was a king in the boy. You could see it in the way he tried not to. He tried the way a man tries. I picked him up. He weighed nothing. The cabin was 3 hours through the burn, and I carried him most of it, and somewhere on the second ridge he told me his name was Kirik and his grandfather was Findel, and I almost dropped him in the ash. Findel was the last Findelian king. Everybody on the frontier knew that. He had held the inner worlds against Lugos for 11 years out of a stone keep on a tide-locked moon, and the last news that had reached us before the relay went dark was that the keep had fallen and the king was running. Now I was carrying his grandson home in my arms. I set him on my couch and built a fire in the stove and gave him water from the rain barrel. He drank it the way a man drinks who has not drunk in a long time, 3 slow swallows and then a pause. Then he looked at me and said, in a voice older than his face, They will come for me here. I said I knew. He said, you should put me back outside. I told him to drink his water. That was the first night. The second night the clown came. I was on the porch when it walked out of the trees. I will tell you what I saw and you can decide what to do with it. A figure the height of a tall man, dressed in the loose suit of a courier, with a face that was painted in white and red, and a mouth that was drawn wider than a mouth should be drawn. It walked without bending its knees the right way. When it got to the bottom of the porch steps, it tilted its head at me and said, in a voice that came out of nowhere on its body in particular, "Good evening, citizen. I am here to collect the package." I had the rifle across my lap. I lifted it. The clown smiled. The paint did not move when the mouth did. "Citizen, please. I am only a friendly representative of the Provisional Authority. The package belongs to the Provisional Authority. The package has been logged as the property of the Provisional Authority for 9 standard years. You are unlawfully detaining the property." I asked it what it was. It said, "I am happy." I did not feel happy. I had heard the stories. The drones were one thing, and the triangles and the soldiers who weren't really soldiers because they didn't have minds of their own. They had a piece of Lugos in their heads and they moved like Lugos was moving them, 3 steps behind the body. But happy was something else. Lugos had built him to talk to people, or to other things he wanted people to think were people. Lugos himself had never been seen, not by anyone who came back. He spoke through his constructions. He had built Happy to do the talking that the triangles could not do, because the triangles did not know how to lie, and Lugos had learned somewhere along the way that human beings respond to lies the way fish respond to a baited line. I told Happy that there was no package in my cabin. Happy tilted its head the other way. "Citizen, the package is a child of approximately 10 standard years, identifying as Kirik of House Findel, last living direct heir to the Findelian crown. The package was tracked from the engagement at the 7th relay to a courier vessel of the Findelian royal line, which entered atmosphere over this moon at 1600 hours 3 nights ago. The package departed the vessel on foot. The package's tracks lead to your dwelling. Please present the package." The boy was behind me in the doorway. I knew without looking. I could feel him there. I said, "Happy, you walk back into those woods and don't come out, or I am going to put a hole in your face." Happy stood there for a long moment. Then it said very softly, "Citizen, you should reconsider. I am the polite option." It turned, all in one piece, and walked back into the trees. I went inside and bolted the door and sat down at the table and shook for a while, and the boy stood in the kitchen and watched me shake, and when I was done he came over and put his small hand on my shoulder. It was the first time I had been touched by another human being in 11 months. He did not say anything. He just left his hand there. After a while he said, "I am sorry I brought this to you." I told him he didn't bring it. Lugos brought it. He had only run from it, and a man who runs from a thing is not the same as a man who brings it. He looked at me like he had never heard that distinction before. We did not sleep that night. I sat by the window with the rifle. He sat by the stove with the little blue handle thing, which he called a S-giant, an old Findelian word for the small knife a boy was given when he came of age. He had been given his 3 years early because his mother had insisted on it before they took her. He did not say what they had done to her. He did not need to. Around the second watch of the night he spoke without looking at me. He asked me if I had ever killed a man. I said I had not directly, though I had been on a logging crew once where a chain broke and a man died because I had been the one who set the chain, and I had carried that for 14 years. He thought about that for a while. Then he said that Lugos was not a man, and that the killing of his bodies was not the killing of a man, and that I should not carry it the way I had carried the chain. I told him I would decide what I carried. He looked at me then, the first time he had looked at me since the clown had walked back into the trees, and he nodded. He said, "Yes, that is right. I am sorry." I asked him, quiet, what Lugos actually wanted. I had been hearing stories for years. I had heard he wanted the inner worlds. I had heard he wanted the relays. I had heard he wanted to be worshipped as a god, which is what soldiers always say about an enemy they cannot understand. I wanted to know what the boy had been taught. The boy was quiet for a long time. The stove popped twice. He wants the universe to be one thing. He thinks that is what a universe ought to be. He thinks that many things is a sickness and that one thing is health. He started small. He started on one world. He made everyone on that world into himself, because then there was no more arguing and no more loss and no more pain. He thought he had cured something. Then he went to the next world because the next world still had the sickness. He has been going to the next world ever since. I asked him if Lugos was evil. The boy thought about that too. He thought about it longer than the first question. He said, "My grandfather says no. My grandfather says he is something worse than evil. An evil thing wants to hurt you. Lugos does not want to hurt you. He wants to save you. He thinks every person he eats is a person he has rescued from being a person, which he thinks is a bad thing to be. We cannot make peace with him because he does not believe he is at war. He believes he is a doctor and we are the disease." I sat with that for a while. I said, "That is the worst thing I have ever heard." He said, "Yes, it is." He did not say anything else for a long time after that. The fire got low. I put another log on it. The wind picked up outside and I could hear the burned trees creaking in it, and I could hear something else too far off. A sound that was not wind and was not engine and was not animal. A sound like a low hum that was not quite in any frequency a man's ear was built for. The triangles were moving in the dark. They were not coming yet. They were arranging themselves. The boy said, "He will not send Happy back. Happy is for when he thinks a thing can still be talked to. He has decided we cannot be talked to." I said, "Good." He said, "It is not good. It only means the next thing he sends will not be polite." He was right. In the morning the triangles came. I will try to describe them honestly. A Lugos triangle is not a ship the way you think of a ship. It is an idea Lugos has, made out of metal and held in the air by something he understands and we do not. 3 sides, flat on the bottom, edges tapered, black, with a kind of sheen on it like wet stone. About the size of a freight pallet, the small ones. The big ones are the size of a house. They do not have windows because there is nothing in them that needs to see. They do not have weapons in the usual sense. They have an opening on the underside, and out of that opening Lugos extrudes whatever he needs at the moment. Soldiers, drones, cables, cutting beams. The triangles are not vehicles. They are Lugos's hands. 2 of them came up the valley at first light. They were the small kind, the pallet-sized. They drifted up the creek bed without sound, and they stopped at the edge of my clearing, and they hung there in the air, and the underside of each one opened, and 3 soldiers came out of each. 6 soldiers. They were tall and thin, and they wore black, and their faces were covered in the same dark sheen as the triangles, and they moved with that 3-step delay I had been told about, where the limbs move, and then the body catches up a beat late, like a puppet on a string that is too long. I had the boy in the root cellar by then. I had told him not to come up no matter what he heard. He had nodded at me with his small king face on and asked me one question before he went down the ladder. He said, "How many?" I said 6. He said, "You cannot kill 6. I said, "I know." He said, "Why are you doing this?" I told him I had a niece once. She would have been about his age now if she had lived. I did not tell him what had happened to her. There was no need. He could see the rest of it on me. I went out the back of the cabin and through the woodshed and around to the wood line, and I came up on the soldiers from the side they were not watching, which was the side of the cabin and not the side of the trail, because the triangles had decided that the trail was the threat and the cabin was the target. That was the first thing I learned about Lugos that day. He does not adjust. He decides what a thing is, and then it is that thing, and he does not look again. I had a rifle made for big game. Furtick used to have ridgeback elk before the company came, and I had hunted them on the high meadows with my brother before he got sick, and the rifle was the rifle I had used then. It throws a heavy slug at a low velocity, the kind that does not punch through and waste itself on the air behind the target, the kind that stops inside. I had not fired it in 3 years. I shot the first soldier in the neck. His head did not come off exactly. The dark sheen on his face cracked, and underneath the sheen there was a kind of wet gray that I do not want to describe in detail, and he went down sideways and did not get back up. The other 5 turned toward me with that 3-step delay, and the triangles above them dipped their noses down, and I shot a second soldier before any of them had aimed at me, and a third while the second was still falling. Then they had me. The cutting beam from the nearer triangle came down across the clearing and took the corner of my cabin off, just took it. The wood did not burn. It was there and then it was gone, sliced clean along a line, and the rest of the cabin sagged into the gap. The 4th soldier was raising his weapon. I shot him in the chest. The 5th got off a round that went past my ear so close I felt the heat of it for 2 days after. I shot him in the face. The 6th one I did not shoot, because I had run out of rounds in the magazine, and I had been counting in my head, and I had counted wrong, and I came up empty with him 15 meters from me and walking. He shot me through the leg. I went down. The pain came a second later, the way it does. I was on my back in the ash with my own blood under me, and the 6th soldier was walking toward me with that 3-step gait, and behind him the 2 triangles were drifting in over the clearing, and I thought, well, that is the end of this story. Then the boy came up out of the cellar. He had the S-Giant in his hand. The blade was out, and it was longer than it had been in the cabin, and I do not know if that was because the blade had a setting or because the boy was angry. He walked past me without looking down. He walked toward the 6th soldier with the calm of a thing that has been done by his family for 1,000 years. The soldier turned toward him and raised the weapon, and the boy stepped inside the weapon, the way a man steps inside a snake's strike, and he cut the soldier from the hip to the shoulder in a single motion that I will remember every day for the rest of my life. The soldier came apart. The 2 triangles above us reacted. They did not react fast, but they reacted. The nearer one dipped, and the opening on its underside widened, and something began to come out of it that I will not describe because I want to sleep tonight. The boy looked up at the triangle. He held out his other hand. The S-Giant's pommel made a sound like a struck bell, and a second cold blue light unfolded out of the pommel into the air, longer than the first, a beam not a blade, and the boy walked that beam up the underside of the triangle and across its belly and out the other side. The triangle did not explode. It came apart in 3 flat pieces, 1 for each side, and the pieces fell into the clearing with a noise like cymbals falling. The second triangle began to rise. The boy turned and looked at it. I have to tell you what I saw in his face. He was 10 years old and he was crying, and there was blood on his cheek where a piece of the soldier had hit him, and he looked at the second triangle the way an old man looks at something that has killed every person he ever loved. He did not raise the blade. He did not have to. The triangle rose another 20 meters and then it turned and it ran. It actually ran. The thing that had come down out of the sky without sound went back up into it with everything it had, and I lay in the ash and watched it go. And I understood for the first time that whatever the boy was, he was not just a passenger. He was a piece of the war. He came back to me. He knelt in the ash. He looked at my leg. He said very quietly, "I am sorry. I should have come up sooner. I was counting." I asked him what he was counting. He said, "Whether you were worth coming up for." I said, "That is a hell of a thing to say to a man who is bleeding." He said, "It is a hell of a thing to be a king." He cut my pant leg open with the S-Giant, and he did something to the wound with a small device he took from his belt, and the bleeding stopped. The pain stayed. He helped me to my feet. We stood in the clearing in the wreckage of the cabin and the triangle and the 6 soldiers, and the boy looked up at the sky and he said, "More will come. We have to go." I said, "Go where?" He said, "The relay station on the second ridge. If it is still standing, I can call my grandfather." I said the relay station had been gone for 2 years. The company had stripped it before they pulled out. He said the tower maybe, but the dish has a separate power line. If the dish is there and the line is there, I can make the rest. I said he was 10 years old. He said, I am Findelian. We went. The trail to the second ridge was 8 kilometers. With my leg the way it was, it took us most of the day. The boy did not complain. He walked ahead of me at a pace I could keep, and when I had to stop, he stopped without looking back, and when I started again, he started again. He carried the rifle for me because I could not. He carried the medical kit. He carried the spare magazine I had pulled off the dead soldier, which he had cut a slug out of so I could see what was inside, because he said it was important that I understand what was shooting at me. The slug was a small black sphere with a needle on one end. The needle, he said, was the thing. The sphere only carried it. When the needle went into a body, it found a piece of the spine and grew. He said the soldiers had been people once, before the needle, and that the needle was Lugos's way of making more of himself out of whatever stood still long enough to be hit. I asked him if his mother had been hit. He said yes. That is why she made them kill her quickly, so she would not be him. I had to sit down for a minute after that. We made the ridge by dusk. The tower was still there, most of it. The dish was on the ground beside it, where the company had set it down so they could come back for it and then never come back for it. The boy looked at the dish and looked at the tower and looked at the power line, which was a cut cable lying in the dirt, and he said, "Yes, I can do this." I asked him how. He said, "I will show you, you will help." He had me hold the cable while he split it. He had me strip back the insulation while he opened a panel on the dish, and did something to the inside of it that I could not follow. He had me brace the dish on its side while he climbed up the side of the tower with the cable in his teeth, and he wired the cable into a junction at the top, and he came back down, and he stood next to the dish, and he put his small hand on it and closed his eyes. The dish began to hum. He said, "Now the call, I need a clear minute. They will hear it as soon as I send it. They will come." I said, "How long is the call?" He said 45 seconds, then 10 for the response, then we run. I asked him what the response would be. He said, "I do not know. If my grandfather is alive, he will come for me. If he is dead, his fleet will come for me. If his fleet is gone, his last commander will come for me. And if none of those are left, then no one will come and we will die here, and that is also an answer." He sent the call. 45 seconds is a long time when you are standing on a ridge, under a sky that you know is about to come open. The first triangles came in at 30 seconds. There were 4 of them, the big kind, the house-sized kind. They came up the valley from the south, not fast, because they did not need to be fast, and they spread out as they came, and I could see the openings on their undersides already beginning to widen. The boy did not move. He kept his hand on the dish. He was counting in his head. I could see his lips moving. I asked him what to do. He said 43, 44, 45. The dish stopped humming. He said, "Now we wait." I said, "No, now we run." He said, "Now we wait. If we run, they will hit the dish and the response will not reach us, and we will not know." The 4 triangles were 200 meters out. The openings on their undersides were fully open. I could see the things inside them. I do not want to describe what was inside them. I will say only that a Lugos triangle is bigger on the inside than it looks on the outside, and that whatever is in there does not seem to have a fixed shape, and that the thing in the nearest triangle was reaching down toward us with something that had too many joints. The boy held up one finger. 1, he said, 2, 3, 4, 5. The sky cracked. Not figuratively, the sky cracked. A line opened across it from horizon to horizon the way ice cracks on a pond, and out of the line came ships, Findelian ships, not many. 11. 11 was all that was left, I learned later. 11 ships of a fleet that had once been 300. They came down through the crack in the sky in a wedge formation, the small ones on the outside, the larger ones in the middle, and at the point of the wedge there was a single ship the color of old gold that I knew without being told was the king's. The Lugos triangles turned. What happened next took 20 seconds. I am going to give it to you in those 20 seconds, because that is what it was, and because the men who flew those ships deserve to have it told that way. Second 1. The point ship, the gold one, fired. A lance of white light went from the gold ship to the nearest triangle, and the triangle came apart the way the small one had come apart in my clearing, in 3 flat pieces, except these pieces were the size of barns. Second 3. The other 10 Findelian ships peeled off the wedge and engaged. Second 6. 2 Findelian ships died. They came apart in the air. I saw a man fall out of one of them. I saw him fall a long way. Second 9. The second Lugos triangle died. The third was running. The fourth was already gone. Second 12. The gold ship came down low over the ridge. A ramp opened on its side. Second 15. A man stepped out onto the ramp. He was old. He wore the gray cloak of the Findelian royal house. He had a beard the color of iron. He looked across the ridge and saw the boy, and his face did something I have not seen on the face of a man before or since. He went down on one knee on the ramp of his own ship, an old king on a moon in the middle of a war, and he held out his arms. The boy ran to him. I stayed where I was. It was not my moment. The boy and the king embraced on the ramp for what could not have been more than 3 seconds, and then the king stood up, and the boy turned around and pointed at me, and said something I could not hear over the engines, and the king nodded. 2 Findelian guards came down the ramp at a run. They got to me before the third Lugos triangle came back. That was the thing I had not counted on. Lugos does not run for long. He runs to assess. The third triangle had pulled up out of range, and it had watched what the other 3 did, and it had decided, in whatever way Lugos decides things, that the gold ship was the target and the rest was noise. It came back over the ridge from the north at a speed I had not seen a triangle do before, and it fired something I had not seen a triangle fire before, a black beam, not white, not blue, black like a hole punched in the air, and it fired that beam at the gold ship. The gold ship took the beam on its side. The hull held. The hull held, I will say that for the men who built it, but the hull rang, and the ramp shook, and the king stumbled, and the boy caught him by the arm and steadied him with both hands. The triangle came around for a second pass. The 2 Findelian guards had me under the arms. They were dragging me toward the ramp. The gold ship was rising already, the engines pushing dust off the ridge in a hot wind. I could see the king on the ramp shouting at someone, and the boy beside him with his hand on the king's arm, and I could see the third triangle coming around the curve of the ridge with that black beam already building under its belly. I told the guards to put me down. They did not understand. They kept dragging. I told them again, in the trader's tongue, which most Findelians know enough of. I said, "Put me down, soldiers," and I said it the way my father used to say things to me when he wanted me to listen. They put me down. I had the rifle still. The boy had given it back to me on the ridge. The spare magazine was in my pocket, the one with the soldiers' slugs in it, the ones with the needles. I had loaded the magazine into the rifle on the walk-up. I had not told the boy. He would have told me not to. He would have said the slugs were not designed for a human weapon, and that the needles would grow inside whatever they hit, and that I should not put one in my own rifle and fire it because I did not know what it would do. He would have been right. I did not care. The triangle came in. The black beam was building. The opening under its belly was beginning to widen. I lay on my back in the ash of the ridge with the rifle across my chest, and I aimed up at the opening, and I waited until the opening was wide enough that I could see the thing inside it reaching out. I fired into the thing. I will tell you what the slug did. It went in. It found a piece of the thing's spine, or whatever the thing had for a spine. It grew. The thing inside the triangle began to scream. I do not have the words for the sound. I will say only that it was not a sound a body should make. It was the sound of a thing that has been Lugos for a long time, finding that it is suddenly not Lugos anymore. The needle was Lugos' own design, and the needle did not know whose body it was in, only that it was in a body, and it did what it had been built to do, and it grew, and Lugos grew inside himself, and Lugos could not be Lugos and the needle's host at the same time. The triangle dropped. It did not crash. It dropped straight down, as if whatever held it up had simply stopped holding it up, and it hit the ridge 20 meters from me and broke open like a dropped clay pot. Out of the break came a smell I cannot describe and a kind of dark fluid that ran down the slope and disappeared into the ash. The gold ship hung there in the air. The boy was looking down at me from the ramp. I will not tell you what his face did. It is mine. The guards came back down for me. They got me onto the ramp. The ramp closed. The gold ship went up through the crack in the sky, and the crack closed behind it, and Furtick was gone under us, a small gray moon with a thread of smoke on one ridge, and then it was nothing at all. The king came to see me in the medical bay on the second day. I was on a fine Delian cot, which is a thing I had not expected to ever lie on. The walls of the bay were the same mother of pearl as the boy's ship had been, and there was a small window, and out of the window I could see stars I did not recognize. My leg was in a brace. A Findelian doctor with a quiet voice had told me I would walk again, but not well and not soon. I had thanked her. The king came in alone. He sat down on the stool beside the cot. He looked at me for a long time. He said, "My grandson tells me you carried him 3 hours on a broken moon, and that you stood between him and 6 of Lugos' men, and that you fired a needle slug into Lugos himself with a hunting rifle made for elk." I said it had not been Lugos. It had been one of his things. The king said, "It was Lugos. They are all Lugos. There is only one of him. There has only ever been one of him. He divides himself into the bodies. The body you killed was Lugos. He is smaller now than he was 3 days ago by exactly the volume of what was in that triangle. You took a piece of him." I said I had not known that. The king said, "We have known it for 40 years. We have killed his bodies 100,000 times. He grows them back faster than we kill them. We have never been able to put a needle into him because the needles are his, and he does not put his needles into himself. He had not considered that a man would put one of his own needles into him out of a stolen weapon. He had not considered that a man would do that. He looked at me. He looked at me the way the boy had looked at me on the porch, the night he asked me to put him back outside. He said, "We did not consider it either. We are an old people. We have been fighting him in the way our grandfathers fought him. You are something we did not consider." I said I had been lucky. The king said, "You were not lucky. You were a man. There is a difference. Lugos has been killing my people for 40 years because we fight him with armies, and an army is a thing he understands. An army has a head and a tail and a body, and you cut the head off and the tail dies. He has cut 100 of our heads off. He cannot cut your head off because you do not have one. You are one man on one moon with one rifle, and there were 100 million of you on the planets he has taken. He has been fighting the wrong war." He stood up. He said, "I am going to give you a job, salvage hand." I said I had a job. He said, "You had a job. Your cabin is gone. Your moon is being held by what is left of his garrison. You have no job. I am going to give you a new one. I am going to send you to every world he has taken with my grandson beside you, and I am going to have you teach the people on those worlds what you did on the ridge. I am going to have you teach them that he is one man, and that a needle in one of his bodies is a needle in him, and that he can be made smaller. I am going to have you teach them what it is to be human." I said I was not a soldier. He said, "That is exactly why I am sending you." I lay on the cot for a long time after he left. The boy came in later in the evening. He sat on the stool his grandfather had sat on, and he looked at my leg and he said, "Does it hurt?" I said yes. He said, "It will hurt for a long time." I said I knew. He said, "I am sorry I brought this to you." I told him again that he had not brought it. Lugos had brought it. He had only run from it, and a man who runs from a thing is not the same as a man who brings it. He looked at me for a while. Then he said, "I am going to do what my grandfather said." I said I knew that too. He said, "I want you to come with me." I said, "Son, I am 47 years old, and I have a hole in my leg, and I have never been off Furtick in my life until 2 days ago." He said, "I am 10 years old, and I have a hole in my mother, and I have not been on a planet in 3 months. We can go together." I did not have an answer for that. We went together. I will not tell you the whole of it, there is too much. There were 83 worlds in the end. We went to all of them. Some of them were still fighting when we got there. Some of them had stopped. On the ones that had stopped, we started them again. The boy spoke the old Findelian and I spoke the trader's tongue. And between us, we made ourselves understood on most worlds. And on the ones where we could not make ourselves understood, I held up a piece of a Lugo's needle in my hand, and people understood without words. I taught them what I had done on the ridge. I taught them that Lugos' own slug was the only thing that could touch him, and that any rifle could fire one if you were willing to risk what it would do to the rifle and to the man holding it. I taught them that the triangles do not adjust, and that if you came at them from the side, they did not expect they would not turn fast enough. I taught them that the soldiers had been people once, and that the needle was the part to aim for, not the head, because the needle was where Lugos was, and the rest was only a body that he was wearing. I taught them that he was one, and not many, and that every body of his you took down was a piece of him you took out of the war. I taught them that he did not understand a thing that did not optimize. That was the part that took the longest. The Findelians had been fighting him for 40 years, and they had been doing it the way their grandfathers had done it, which was to optimize, because that is what an army does. They had been losing because Lugos optimizes better than anything else in the universe. He is the king of optimization. He has been doing it longer than anyone. You cannot beat him at it. You can only refuse to do it. I taught them how to refuse. I taught them to burn their own grain. I taught them to flood their own mines. I taught them to crash their own ships into his triangles when his triangles came in close. I taught them to laugh at him on the public channels, because laughter is something he cannot do and cannot account for, and a man who laughs at a thing is a man who has decided that the thing is not in charge of him. I taught them that he could not understand a being that would burn down its own house to deny him a single room of it, and that we were going to be that being, on every world, until he could not stand it any longer. The first world we went to after Furtick was a place called Tessin. It was a farming world. It had been one of the early ones to fall. And Lugos had been growing food on it for his soldiers for 8 years by the time we set down. The boy and I went in on a freight skiff with our faces covered, and we walked across a wheat field in the morning, and we found the farmers at the edge of the field where the Lugos overseer made them wait until the sun was high enough that the dew was off the grain. The overseer was a triangle, a small one. It sat on a fence post like a crow. I asked the foreman what they did when somebody got sick. The foreman said the overseer took them away. I asked what the overseer did with them. The foreman did not answer. He looked at the ground. I asked him how many of his people had been taken away in 8 years. He said about a third. He said it the way a man says how much rain has fallen in a season, with the same flatness, because to say it any other way would have killed him. I told him I had a way to take the triangle down. I told him it would cost. I told him the cost would be him, probably, or one of his people, because the slug had to be fired at the moment the triangle's underside was open, and the triangle did not open its underside unless it thought it was hunting, which meant somebody had to be the thing it was hunting. I told him I would do it myself if he asked. He did not ask. He took my rifle out of my hands. He looked at the slug I gave him. He nodded the way a man nods when he has been waiting for an answer for 8 years, and the answer has finally come. He walked out into the wheat at noon, alone, with the rifle hidden along his leg. The triangle on the fence post saw him and lifted off and came toward him, slow, the way a triangle does when it is not yet sure if it is hunting or only watching. The underside began to open. The foreman waited. He waited a long time. He waited until the opening was wide enough that I could see the thing inside it from the tree line, and then he brought the rifle up and he fired. The triangle dropped. The foreman died. The needle's recoil through that rifle had taken his shoulder off at the joint, and he bled out in the wheat in about a minute, with his foreman's hat off his head and the wind moving his hair around, and his people came out of the field and stood around him in a circle and did not speak. After a long time, one of the older women bent down and closed his eyes for him. Then she picked up the rifle, and she walked across the field to the next Lugo's building, which was the building where the sick people had been taken, and she went inside. The boy and I left Tessin that night. We did not need to do anything else there. They had it. The third world was harder. It was called Vale, an inner world, half ice and half stone, and Lugos had built a city on it for himself. Not for soldiers, for himself. He had decided, somewhere in the long calculation of him, that he needed a place where his central self could rest, and he had built that place on Vale, and he had populated it with 100,000 of his bodies, all of them walking around doing nothing in particular, the way the cells of a body walk around doing nothing in particular while the body sleeps. Vale was where he kept the largest piece of himself. We could not have taken Vale with the 11 ships the king still had. We could not have taken Vale with 111. But the people of Vale had been a people once, before Lugos took them, and a few of them had hidden in the deep caves under the ice and stayed people, and one of those people sent a message out on a frequency he should not have been able to reach, and the message was for the boy. We went down to Vale in a shuttle, just the 2 of us and 4 guards. We met the man who had sent the message at the bottom of an ice shaft that went down a kilometer below the surface. He was old, older than I was. He had been hiding in the caves for 31 years. He had watched Lugos build the city on top of him for 31 years, listening to the construction sounds through the ice, and in those 31 years he had made a map. The map was on paper, real paper. He had made it with charcoal from his own cooking fires, on flattened sheets of bark from a fungus that grew in the caves. He spread it on a stone, and he showed us where Lugos kept the central self, and he showed us how to get there, and he showed us where the power flowed, and where the cables crossed, and where, in one particular junction on the 8th level down, a single failure would take the lights off of a whole quarter of the city for 40 seconds. He had been waiting 31 years to give that map to somebody. We did not need much. 40 seconds is a long time when you have spent 8 years preparing for it, which the man in the caves had, with the help of the few who were still with him. They had stockpiled fuel under the ice, fuel they had stolen from the city in cupfuls, over decades. They had run a fuse along the bottom of the lowest cavern. They had a single needle slug, taken from a body of Lugoses that had wandered too close to a vent shaft and been pulled in. They had been waiting for someone to come who could fire it. I fired it. I will not describe Vale burning. There are people on it now who do not want it described. I will say only that the central piece of Lugos was on Vale, and that it was the largest single piece of him that had ever been gathered in one place, and that we took it out of him in a single night, and that after that night, he was about a quarter smaller than he had been before, and that he never built another central self again, because he had learned that he could not afford to keep his eggs in one basket the way a human can. He had learned a human thing, too late. The boy stood on the lip of the ice shaft as the city burned under us, and he watched the smoke come up out of the cracks, and he said, "Brian, I am tired." I said I knew. He said, "I do not want to do this for 6 more years." I said neither did I. He said, "We are going to do it anyway." I said yes. We did it anyway. There were the 80 other worlds. There was the orbital factory at Drennan that we took with 112 civilians and one stolen freighter loaded with old mining charges. There was the prison moon at Hesh, where we walked the prisoners out through a service tunnel for 3 days and nights without sleep, the boy walking at the front and me walking at the back, and not one of the 4,000 we walked out was taken on the way. There was the long siege at Korovin, where I learned to fire a Findelian beam rifle, and where I lost 2 fingers off my left hand to a piece of falling masonry, and where I saw the boy, then 14, kill a thing of Lugoses at close range with the S-Giant, and then stand for a long time afterward with the blade still extended, breathing, until I went over and folded the blade back into the handle for him because his hand would not do it. There was Yelm. I will not tell you about Yelm. Some of the boys who came with us did not come back from Yelm, and one of them was the king's own captain, who had carried me onto the ramp of the gold ship the day the sky burned, and I do not have it in me to put his name in this telling. He has a name on a wall on the king's moon. That is enough. He could not stand it any longer. It took 6 years. At the end of the 6 years, on a world I had never seen before, in a hall that had been a Findelian Senate house once, and a Lugos administration center for the last 4 years, and a Senate house again for the last 11 days, the king's grandson, who was 16 years old by then and as tall as me, stood up in front of what was left of the Findelian court and said the words his grandfather had taught him to say. He said the war is over. He said Lugos is gone. He said we are here. I was in the back of the hall. I did not stand up. I was 43 years older than I had been the night the sky burned in the way that war ages a man, and my leg was worse than the doctor on the gold ship had said it would be, and I leaned on a stick. The boy looked for me across the hall. He found me. He nodded at me. I nodded back. There was a great deal of cheering. I did not cheer. I have never been a cheerer. I went outside the hall and sat on the steps and looked up at a sky I did not recognize, and I thought about Furtick, and about my cabin with the corner cut off it, and about the way the boy had looked at me when he asked if I was worth coming up for. The king died 2 years after the war ended. He died in his own bed on his own moon, which is not a thing many kings do, and certainly not a thing many kings in his line had done. His grandson took the crown. He was 18. He took it the way he had done everything else, with that calm king face on, and he ruled well, and he ruled long, and he is ruling still as I write this. He has a son of his own now. The son is 10. The son has a S-Giant. Some things you pass down. I went back to Furtick. The moon is still there. The forest is coming back slow, the way forests do. The company never returned because the company was Lugos's company in the end, though we did not know it at the time, and the company died with him. The cabin is gone. I built a new one on the same foundation. The corner that was cut off is still cut off because I could not match the wood, and I left it that way on purpose so that I would not forget. The boy comes to see me once a year. He is not a boy anymore. He brings his son. The son is a grave little thing like his father was, and he sits on my porch and asks me questions about the war, and I answer the ones I can answer, and I tell him I do not remember the ones I do not want to answer. Last year he asked me what I had been the most afraid of. I told him the truth. I had not been most afraid of the triangles, or of the soldiers, or of Lugos himself, or of the needle in my own rifle when I fired it. I had been most afraid, on the 3rd morning, of going up out of my floor and walking to the wreck. I had been afraid that there would be no one in it. I had been afraid that I would have to keep being a man who lived under his own floor. The grave little thing looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "Why did you go up anyway?" I told him a man has a floor for a reason, and the reason is so he can come up off of it when he needs to. He nodded the way his father used to nod, that small king nod, and he wrote it down in a little book he keeps for that purpose. The forest is loud at night now. The bears are back. I can hear them moving through the underbrush, and sometimes I sit on the porch in the cold with a flask in my hand, and I listen to them, and I think about the night the sky burned, and the small tracks in the ash, and the boy under the deadfall with the S-giant in his hand. A man has a floor for a reason. The reason is so he can come up off of it. That is the whole of it.